solar energy peaking, its peak production being during peak demand means that it complements many of the other technologies such as hydroelectric and nuclear. So during periods of hot and dry climate conditions that may cause a reduction in the more traditional methods, solar steps into that gap and can provide peak energy during those times. We also have seen many studies relating to a specifically peak generation technology. There are very complicated factors that you don't necessarily compare that directly to generation costs for some of the more traditional methods, because it is actually producing at a more valuable time. The renewable energy costs will definitely be brought down in the near future, and we're working to bring them down now by the increase of manufacturing capacity. So I'll wrap up with that we are committed to playing an integral part in the future of the sector, and we are pleased to be making investments and support for the business.
Thank you. Now, representing Dow Corning, Marie Eckstein, Corporate Vice President with the new plant in Clarksville. We're delighted to have you in Tennessee, and we're delighted to have you here today. Thank you for coming.
Well, thank you, Senator, and I can say I'm delighted to be here, especially with the sunshine and the warmth that you have down here. I'm here from Midland, Michigan today. I'd first like to start out by thanking you, Senator Alexander, and Congressman Shuler and Congressman Davis for the opportunity to come here today and represent Dow Corning and our joint venture, Hemlock Semiconductor, to talk about a topic that's really dear to all of our hearts, and that is energy security for the future of our country, as well as a low-carbon future. And first, let me tell you a little bit about Dow Corning. We are a high-tech company. We are a materials company that supplies silicones and silicon materials across the value chain for solar. It could be thin film, as some folks here have talked about, or crystalline silicon. We supply the materials that go into solar. We also supply materials that go into other forms of renewable energy, so we're interested in all of those. I brought with me today a sample of polysilicon metal. You won't see this in nature. This is a non-natural occurring metal. This is what we'll be making in the Hemlock Semiconductor facility in Clarksville. So this is a very interesting material and is the beginning of the building blocks for building crystalline solar voltaic or photovoltaic panels. And as Senator Alexander mentioned, we announced recently, actually in December, that we are building a facility in Clarksville where we're investing up to $1.2 billion, which will produce about 1,000 construction jobs over the next 5 to 7 years as we build out that facility. And when it's fully built, we'll be adding people all along that time. When it's fully built, we'll have added 1,000 permanent jobs. And these are high-tech jobs, good paying jobs. So we're very happy to be here and hope that we can work together to really build a sustainable, renewable energy industry in the U.S. and in particular in Tennessee. So from a Dow Corning standpoint, we believe that there is a significant role that the government needs to play in helping to create this energy security and the renewable energy industry in the U.S. And we think that it starts with federal policies that encourage the deployment of renewable energies. This will not only help us with the energy security through more sources of domestic energy, it helps create jobs and it helps with development of innovation and creativity in this country. And part of that federal policy includes what was referred to as the Renewable Electricity Standard. And I think we'll have some more discussion on that as we go along today. We also believe that we need to continue to have federal tax incentives to spur the domestic manufacturing of renewable energies. We've been talking about this a bit in Washington because we have seen as a materials company and traveling around the world that other countries give subsidies to manufacturers. And so if we want to put this market here in terms of using energy, we also want to have the manufacturing jobs here. We also think we need interconnection and net metering standards at a federal level. In addition to the federal regulatory policies, we also think that we need to do more federal funding and private government partnerships in R&D. That will help to develop the industry. And also, we need to develop the green-collar workforce. For example, we have these 1,000 jobs I mentioned that will be created in Tennessee. We need to partner with universities and colleges to make sure that when those plants are ready to come online, we've got the workers trained to take those jobs. And an example of that is that Dow Corning and Hemlock Semiconductor are actually working with Austin Peay State University here in Tennessee to put together a program to train workers so that they're ready for these green-collar jobs that we talk about for the future. And the fourth thing that I want to talk about in terms of the government's role in this is we think there's a great opportunity for the government to lead by example, to start deploying renewable energies at their facilities, to actually do what Congressman Shuler has been talking about in terms of getting more efficient buildings, retrofitting buildings for efficiency to reduce the use of energy so that we help with this getting our energy security. So I know that the renewable energy electricity standard is a point of contention, and I hope that we can talk some more about that today. We do have some opinions about that. We think it's part of the federal support that's needed to get renewables off the ground, to get this industry developed here in the U.S., and so that we can create the jobs in the renewable energy for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you. And now Congressman Davis is here, and let's. He said you could go first.
Senator Alexander, thanks. And for those who have testified today, I've been enlightened and hope that all the things you've said can become a reality and possible, and America will be better off as a result. In the early 70s, as a result of a war in the Middle East, we felt our first squeeze in our economy through the 70s as a result of OPEC organizing and determining the best they could what the cost of our energy was going to be in this country and the West and the rest of the Western Europe. And as we watched that unravel, we saw a president from the South start talking about different sources of energy and becoming energy independent somewhere in the 80s. And we started struggling and moving toward that direction. A lot of research, a lot of development, a lot of fresh ideas. Everything came to the table. I drive through my district. I come off the mountains of Cumberland Plateau, and I drive down from Mont Eagle down toward Chattanooga, and I see on the right-hand side of the interstate a huge group of facilities there that was going to be an ethanol plant. And we spent millions of dollars there and have all across this country on all the ideas of how we were going to become energy independent. Of course, we all know that in the early 80s, we saw the price of fossil fuels drop to the point to where that we felt that we could not competitively bring America to becoming energy independent. Now we're on the second run of it. It is my hope that as we engage in research and development, we should have much more technologically advanced research now than we had 30 years ago. And so it's my hope that when I travel through my district, I don't see facilities like I see now. It was intended to make us energy independent. I like all of your ideas. Keep working on those. I saw this movie one time, said, if you build it, we will come. They built a baseball field, and all of a sudden, folks came and started playing. We don't have an unlimited pool of money in the U.S. government today. I hear a lot of folks suggesting that maybe we give dollars to corporate America. There was a group of folks marching yesterday that said we shouldn't do anything when it comes to corporate America and government. So, you know, we have a pretty big lift that those of us who serve in Washington will have to be lifting over the next 2 to 4 years to determine exactly a direction that we can with a certainty become energy independent. Now I've made a statement. My question is, what percent, to anyone, what percent of renewables and other type of energies that we can actually produce here in America do you envision us being able, honestly, to produce over the next 10 years? We currently import about 5.5 trillion barrels of the 8 trillion barrels that we use of crude oil. What percent of that can we replace?
I can maybe say a little bit about this. First off, I think it's important that we have some understanding of how we define terms, and I'd like to offer up a definition of energy independence. I don't think energy independence means never importing oil again. I think that's not necessary to get to a state of independence. If you go to Webster's dictionary and look up the word independence, what it says is not subject to a restraining influence of others. And I think that's a pretty good definition of independence. We'd like to be in a position where our economic policies and our national security policies are not subject to the restraining influence of others, but we can chart our own course. And then the next question is, what would that look like? If it doesn't mean no imports, it also doesn't mean the kind of level of imports that we currently have and the wealth transfer that's associated with them. We actually have an economist who works at Oak Ridge National Lab named David Green, who's an expert in the transportation sector, but energy more generally. And he's thought a lot about this, and he came up with a kind of measurable definition of what that might look like. And I think it's useful to have a goal like that in mind, because if you can't measure it, you don't really know whether you're getting there. And his working definition was that if the cost of imports was below 1% of our gross domestic product, that would probably constitute a working version of independence. That would be a small enough fraction of our national wealth that we would feel free to make a decision that we had to make. And that's not the level that we're at now. It certainly is not the level that we were at when gasoline was $4 a gallon, but even at $2 a gallon, we're not below that 1% kind of metric. And so then the question is that a realistic goal? And we've actually done some analysis. It wasn't in the next 10 years, but looking, could we get to 2030 to that state where, with pretty high confidence, you know, no matter what really happens to the economy as it goes up and down, and reasonable projections on demand, could we get to that 1% level by 2030? And the answer is yes, that's achievable, but it's not achievable just with accelerated deployment of current technology. We do need some improvements beyond what's currently commercially available or near commercial. And it's a combination of factors. It's no one thing. We know that with biofuels, we could sustainably displace about 30% of our gasoline, which is the primary user of imported oil, not the exclusive. We use it for home heating oil and other things, but gasoline's a dominant factor. We could displace about 30% of that with sustainable biofuels, and by sustainable biofuels, I mean not competing with the food supply. In order to do that, we've got to crack this problem of converting cellulose to sugar cost effectively. We can do that now, but we can't do it cost effectively. So that's a challenge. Electrification of transportation helps. It gets cars off, again, gasoline, imported petroleum, and onto the grid where we have options that are domestic, the sorts of renewable things that we've been talking about today, nuclear, and if we can crack the code on carbon sequestration, obviously using our coal. So that's another piece of it. Energy efficiency is the nearest term thing that we can do. So in terms of the next 10 years, that's where we get the biggest wins. And again, I'm focusing on the transportation sector because we're talking about imported petroleum in the context of your question. The improvement in the CAFE standards that was passed recently is certainly going to help, and it's something that actually we can do with currently available technology. But we can be more aggressive than that. We have lots of options for improvement in terms of lightweight materials and combinations of not only plug-in vehicles, but hybrids and so forth. So I think we could be more aggressive there and see some real near-term benefits on the road to this energy independence goal by 2030.
Thanks. I must apologize, but I appreciate the answer, and I have to be in Pulaski, Tennessee at 3 o'clock.
If you didn't have such a big congressional district, you could stay longer. But thank you for coming, and we knew that you were going to leave early. We appreciate your participation. Congressman Shuler had a question of another witness.
Mr. Hoagland, one of the biggest problems I think we were all trying to devise opportunity for the energy companies. Obviously, with the current structures the way it is now, it's the most important thing they can do is build more power plants to produce more energy to be able to produce a better bottom line for their investors. How do we change that structure to allow the energy independence that we want to get to without having to produce more coal-burning plants, nuclear plants, and others? How can we transfer that type of expense to energy efficiencies in the household? I mean, how do we get to the point where, you know, it's cost effective, it's in the right interest of the energy companies to go and either install solar voltaics, to be able to install as simple as the light bulbs take, you know, when you read your meter. I mean, one of the things that just totally amazes me every time I look at my meter on the outside of my house, it's not in dollars. If we would change that, or every time that my wife wants to press the little button that says higher up for the heat, that it puts a little dollar amount per hour. We do it per miles per gallon. We know what that is at the pump, but when we look at our house, there's nothing that it gives us a relationship to the actual cost it's going to cost us. So how do we ultimately get to that the energy companies will actually profit, because that's what they want to do, besides just building more structures that's environmentally impacting our communities?
Well, I think there's a couple of pieces to that. The first is kind of a technology piece, and that's currently the way the utility industry is set up, and the grid that distributes the energy is behind the scenes, and quite frankly is older technology when you think about what we have in this kind of knowledge age. So the grid itself really has to be upgraded, and that grid has to go all the way to your house. And the term now that's being put around is we have to create a smart grid. And that smart grid would allow us as the utility to put that price in your house. The technologies for being able to do that are out there, and they're in their infancy, but they've not been well integrated and well deployed anywhere across the country. So there needs to be a concerted effort, and in fact TVA is working now with our distributors to find ways to get that smart grid implemented so that you as a consumer, us as a consumer, knows what the electricity is really costing us, and then we can start making decisions in our lives about whether we turn the air conditioner up, whether we put in a more efficient air conditioner, put in a more efficient water heater. But we kind of get the control back, I guess, as a consumer. The utility industry is very interesting because it's one of the few places I know where you get to purchase what you use, but you have no idea how much it costs for a month or so, and then of course you get your bill and then you have to pay. turning that around, I think, is first getting that technology out there, but then is a lot around some of the policies that are out there. Beginning to have utilities put in time of use rates. In other words, rates that truly reflect the cost of the generation for any particular time of day. It also requires looking at other mechanisms for utilities to be able to recover their costs beyond just simply generating a kilowatt hour. Right now, that's, as you pointed out, that really is the standard model. As we generate a kilowatt hour, we get paid for that kilowatt hour. As we get further into energy efficiency, as we move further into smart grid, we have to look at, are there other mechanisms that can, either through time of use rates or other incentives, that allow utilities to recover their costs in such a way that it encourages everybody to use less or use energy more efficiently.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask a question about solar. I'll make my questions brief so I can ask 2 or 3. Let me start with Ms. Eckstein and then Dr. Mason. What's the single thing we could do that would help bring down the cost of solar more quickly? That's really that's the impediment to its growing. Well, what's the single thing we could do that would help do that, keeping in mind cost, period?
Right. I think I understand your question. We believe that the single most important thing we can do is to put federal policies in place that accelerate the deployment of solar.
What does that mean?
So that would mean that while we're still coming up the learning curve in terms of the cost of solar, we need to put, for example, tax incentives in place, or the renewable energy standard that, while it cannot on its own be economically give you a good return, we need to get enough volume out there so that we can get the cost of manufacturing solar down. So we need to get more plants online that will manufacture solar, and as we do that, we'll be able to go through the learning curve and get from generation 1, where we are today, to generation 2 that's starting to be deployed, and generation 3 that we heard about earlier in terms of cost. There's a learning curve, and we will get there with deployment.
Just to press you on that a little bit, but we've been studying the renewable electricity standard, and solar, I mean, TVA just went into the market and they got back basically 60 proposals or so, and the only thing that makes any competitive sense is wind from the Dakotas or somewhere in the West, and we're talking about, I mean, it looks like we'll get to underwater river turbines, wind from out west, biomass and every other thing before we get to solar. So we might have a renewable electricity standard that doesn't do solar any good. I mean, I think of the so-called renewable energy tax credit was passed in 1992. It's basically all gone to wind, didn't do solar any good. So I'm not sure that policy will really make much difference in solar when it costs the taxpayers a lot of money.
What our customers tell us, and we sell the materials, so our customers are the ones actually building the panels, they say that the single most important thing is actually what's called in Europe a feed-in tariff, where that you are spreading the cost of the solar to all of the users across a given service area. And so, for example, in Germany, when they implemented a feed-in tariff, you could put solar panels on your roof, sell back to the utility for, I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was at a good return, and then you would have a guaranteed income from those panels over a 20-year period. And so that is one mechanism that has worked very successfully in Germany to spread the use of solar energy, and they actually are the biggest market today for solar energy deployment.
Dr. Mason, do you have a comment on that?
Well, I think certainly there's an economy of scale factor and learning curve that even with the current generation will drive costs down. Obviously, as a research lab, we're more focused on the further out technologies, and the general common feature to the what you might call third generation solar technologies and even many of the second generation ones is they they rely on variations on thin films, basically because if you take the bulk polycrystalline silicon example, you're actually only producing the energy in a small fraction of that bulk because the light doesn't penetrate. As you can see, it's not transparent. It's really only a near surface effect. It's expensive material, so if you can just work with a very thin layer, you reduce your usage of it. The problem with those technologies is right now, typically, although in a laboratory you can get pretty good efficiencies, when you try to go to scale production, the efficiency degrades. And that's a materials problem. We understand a lot about materials. I think we can work on those problems, and we can maintain the efficiency, but still go to high throughput, low cost manufacturing with some hard work. So I think there are options there. Another possibility is looking at polymeric thin films. The challenge there is that conducting polymers work, but they degrade due to the ultraviolet light and become embrittled, and the efficiency degrades over time, so you don't get that 20-year lifetime. Again, that's a materials problem. We understand a lot about materials. We're learning more about them, so I think they're solvable problems, but they are really at the interface between fundamental and applied research, and although I think they will give us options on the time scale of the phase-in of the renewable portfolio standard, they're not available for deployment right now, so it's kind of like those cases I talked about in response to Lincoln Davis's question. Accelerated deployment of current technology is a very good thing to do. It builds markets, it addresses some of the integration questions, but we also need to be working on those longer-term technological transformations that could really make a step change in cost.
Thank you. Let me ask Jason Ramsey to respond to that, and then Heath, if I may ask a full question, then we'll go to you for questions. Jason, anything to add?
Well, there are a few things. All of the points made are very valid points, and points that we all agree with is true. With our thin film technology, we have overcome some of the issues that have been long-standing hindrances, if you will. Another important part to understand about thin film technology, and it may be also in some of the crystalline technologies, but the market has changed some over the years, especially with the understanding of how it was affected in Europe. This extra degradation in thin film, you don't buy that anymore. So in using a stabilized rate for our modules, we actually rate them at a degraded level, so that it's not that you're losing that. Actually, what you buy, you get a little bit extra for the first 3 to 7 years. So it's an issue that really changes the way you typically view the economics of an investment.
Mr. Irving, thank you very much. Mr. Irving, let me ask you this about your underwater turbines. One, are they commercially, is it a prototype, or are you actually in business somewhere selling these to utilities, number one? Second, how much production, not just capacity, but how much production, how many kilowatt hours, how many megawatts could you sell to TVA from potentially from turbines that you might put in the Mississippi River?
Right, so let me answer the second question first, because that's a little easier. But the numbers we quote are not capacity numbers. That is a tendency we try to avoid, because we find it a little confusing when you compare a coal plant that can get to 90% capacity to a wind facility that's at 18 to 20% capacity. So the numbers we use in terms of estimating output, 600 megawatts, is average generation at water speeds of 2 meters per second. There are places where the water runs faster, and when that happens, you actually get an exponential increase in energy output. So each turbine that we are in the process of manufacturing outputs out 10 kilowatts in a flow of 2.25 meters per second, which is about 4.5 miles an hour.
But what's the bottom line? I mean, how much have you got to sell potentially to TVA?
So 600 megawatts continuous generation.
600 megawatts of continuous.
Right.
So what you're saying, it's 600 megawatts that would be comparable to a coal plant or a nuclear plant.
600, yeah, 600
which is available almost all the time.
Correct.
We call that base load generation in effect, and 600 megawatts would be larger than a new coal plant, a little larger.
Yeah.
Half of a nuclear plant.
Right.
And